Okay, welcome all, and thank you all for joining in. Let me start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we in Australia are joining this webinar. This discussion was to be an in-person discussion, but we have had to pivot to this webinar given that Queensland and particularly Brisbane's gone into lockdown for the next 3 days at least, and so I'm glad everybody could join on this webinar. Thank you very much for doing so. It has, however, had some positives in the sense that a number of people who were not able to join in person have been able to join on the webinar, so there is some positive in that. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge the Honorary Consular General of India, Mrs. Archana Singh, who's joined us. And I also acknowledge that he's registered. I think he's joining in is Ambassador Anil Vadhwa, who's joining from India. So thank you for joining as well. Now the purpose of this discussion has been to discuss the outcomes of the Quad Summit that took place on the 12th of March. And it was the first time that the four leaders got together. They got together virtually, but it was, I think, an important event. And this discussion is really to focus on the implications from a business and trade point of view between Australia and India as what comes out of the results of the Quad. We've got two panelists who are going to lead our discussion, and they are Jim Varghese, who many of you already know, as he's also the chair of the Australia-India Business Council, and we'll come to that. We'll do a little more of an introduction in a minute. But we also have Dr. Ashutosh Mishra, who many of you may have already read. He wrote a paper on the Quad a few days after the summit. And we've got that on our website. So if anybody does want to have a look at that later, they're most welcome to find that there. So without any further ado, I will ask Jim, who is the, as I said, the chair of the Australia-India Business Council, but he also wears many other hats and you see there his little bio on the screen. But more than that, he has been very close to the full development and the relationship that AIBC has within Australia and India, and has the ability to be able to see both sides of the picture. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say. Now, we will have a Q&A after this discussion, and there's a Q&A button for those who are not participants on the bottom of the screen. So please put your questions in there. There's some questions that have already come in, so we'll try and answer those. But also, those who are the participants and on the panel, they're most welcome to ask that in person as well. So over to you, Jim. Thank you very much for being one of our panelists.
Thank you very much, Nick, and I'd like to also congratulate Nick and the Queensland team for hosting this event rather than cancelling one because of the COVID-19 restrictions. And it is really a good example of the agility of the Australia-India Business Council to push ahead with the agenda of increasing the awareness of trade and investment opportunities, but also the global context in which we work. Now, my colleague, Ashutosh Mishra, will be delivering a very studied address to you very shortly. I'm going to share with you some reflections when I look at the media analysis of the Quad, and by that I mean the Australian Fin Review, and also the India Times, Economic Times. So when we look at the re-emergence this year, particularly this year, 2021, the Quad is certainly placing a heavy emphasis on practical actions that the four countries in the Quad can take, rather than narrowly define itself as a bulwark against China's expanding role in the economic, military, and strategic presence. And this is actually exemplified the fact that in the spirit of the Quad, the word security, once the unified threat that bound the group together, rated a mention only twice in the summit's final joint statement, the spirit of the Quad. Even so, there can be no doubt that China's emerging influence and power is something that the Quad cannot ignore and does not ignore. So when we look at this, we can look at these words of Japanese Prime Minister Yoshida Suga when he spoke of feeling emotional about its re-emergence and the group's dedication to realizing a free and open Indo-Pacific. And in this context, Prime Minister Narendra Modi told colleagues, the Quad has come of age. It will now remain an important pillar of stability in the region. And I think Prime Minister Modi's comments makes it very clear to us that this is a good platform for increased trade and investment, not just between India and Australia, but between the region as a whole. Without specifically naming China, our Prime Minister emphasized the need to support the sovereignty, independence, and security of others. And in that broader context, President Biden talked about free of coercion, a feature that less than subtly refers to the Chinese government behavior that each Quad members agreed by, whether in economic, territorial, or other forms of foreign interference in their own directions. So what is encouraging is that all four leaders have agreed to meet in person at their next summit before the end of the year. That is, of course, if we haven't have some unexpected lockdowns as we're currently experiencing here in the state of Queensland. So the ambition of these engagements is fit to the moment. They're committed to leveraging partnership to help the world's most dynamic region respond to historic crisis that maybe open the free, accessible, diverse, and thriving Indo-Pacific, of which India is, and Australia is a very important point. And in this context, it's important to note that we, together with the Quad, is facing China in the context of cheaper mass-scale production by state-owned enterprises. Tied to this is large cyber attacks, a global shortage of microchips, and the race to build fast 5G mobile networks have really emphasized the importance of the Quad, and of course, India's great expertise in information technology and one of the growing areas of closer cooperation between India and Australia. We only have to look at Huawei, which is the Chinese monolith, and see that the Quad has pledged to encourage cooperation on telecommunications deployment, diversification of equipment suppliers, and future telecommunications. And when you look at that, you can see the trade opportunities that are already in there. So when we take a broader look, that by expanding from a narrow maritime security focus, the Quad has deliberately made a play for even greater clout with smaller, like-minded nations. And highlighting its practical vaccine initiative, the senior US trade administration officials involved in steering pre-summit negotiations said meeting basic needs of people within the region is integral to the survival of the grouping. And I quote, "If the Quad cannot do that, it cannot address constructively those issues, we will quickly lose relevance and be strategically insignificant." So when we look at this and start to reflect, it shouldn't come as a surprise that the spirit of this Quad is that we strive for a region that is free, open, inclusive, healthy, anchored by democratic values and unconstrained by coercion. And a key challenge in front of the Quad, again, their own statements, notes that the economic and health impacts of COVID-19, climate change, and shared challenges, including in cyberspace, critical technology, counterterrorism, quality infrastructure investment, and humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, as well as maritime domains. So if I was looking ahead and trying to look and see where do we go from here, there are some challenges for the Quad. One, of course, is they're all committed to the demilitarization of North Korea. And I think they've diplomatically stated, as far as Myanmar goes, that as a long-standing supporter of Myanmar and its people, we emphasize the urgent need to restore democracy and priority of strengthening democratic resilience. So in conclusion, and this gives enough time for my colleagues for you to listen to my colleague Ashutosh Mishra, I'd like to end with this note. And when you look at the joint statement that saw the 4 countries committing to establish their 3 new working groups, we need to keep a close eye on these working groups, because I think they will become very important to us. And these working groups are on vaccines, emerging technology, and climate change. And we will be seeing initiatives like the Quad vaccine partnerships that are already starting to happen. So in conclusion, I would quote from Ned Price from the Department of State Development, where he says, "This discussion with the Quad foreign ministers, with their meet from time to time, is critical to advancing our shared goals in the free and open Indo-Pacific and rising to the defining challenges of our time, including coordinating our efforts and COVID-19 response, as well as climate change." Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Jim. That's a great lot of opening remarks for this discussion. I'd now like to call on Dr. Ashutosh Mishra. So Ashutosh is the CEO and Executive Director of the Institute of Australia-India Engagement. And he was the founder of that organization, but he's also a member of the Queensland Management Committee of the AIBC, and a very active member in that committee, which I thank him very much for. He also has, as you can see in his CV, he's an expert on India and Asia, and having studied history and political sciences, has a lot of expertise in this area. He also sort of slightly aside from this, is a very active cricketer, and has organizing on the 17th of this month an active a cricket match with the Queensland Police Force, with the Asia diaspora, which I'm sure will be great fun for those who want to attend. But he's an active community member, but also an expertise in Asia and India. And Ashutosh, over to you. Look forward to hearing your presentation. You're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Thank you so much for that kind and generous introduction. And I must also thank the Australia-India Business Council, both the national and the state team, for putting together such an event at such a short notice. These days, logistics remain one of the biggest challenges in organizing events because there are so many compliance issues which have to be looked into, boxes to be ticked. So congratulations and kudos for doing at such a short notice. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak on something which has always been very close to my heart. As a scholar of international relations and history, I've always followed developments in the international affairs at the bilateral level. With regards to Quad, why it is especially attractive to me, because when I was in India with the Ministry of Defense's think tank, the Institute for Defense Studies Analysis, we have been looking at the evolution of Quad from India. And it is a double delight for me that now I'm in Australia and seeing the fruition of Quad. So it gives me a dual perspective of the evolution of the Quad and what it means for both sides. So when the virtual summit took place, I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to sort of have a broad discussion on what it means for Australia-India bilateral relationship. Because I was quite encouraged to see what Peter Verghese had written in his report, and I'll refer to that in my presentation. And I thought why it is important to take into account the fruition of Quad and Quad's coming of age. The coming of age was the term used by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and what it means for a bilateral relationship, and have a broad discussion on how Australia and India can leverage what is happening at the quadrilateral level, and how they can use it for bilateral benefits. So I've put a few slides together to give you a brief context of the Quad and what it means for us. So can I have the next slide, please, Vishal? Thank you. You see the bilateral relationship, Australia and India bilateral relationship has come a long way. From pre-2009, bilateral ties have now come a long way. In 2009, they were elevated to strategic partnership between Kevin Rudd and Manmohan Singh. And then in 2020, during the virtual summit, it was elevated into a comprehensive strategic partnership. And ever since, what is being termed as a historic high bilateral relationship. So in the last 20 years, we have come a long way. And the quality of the relationship itself, you can make out from the fact that Prime Minister Scott Morrison and Prime Minister Modi have met 6 times in the last 3 years. In Singapore, in Osaka, in Biarritz, in France, Bangkok, and then we had the virtual summit in June 2020, and then of course the Quad summit. So they have met 6 times, which talks about the richness of the bilateral ties and how the both leaders never miss an opportunity to meet and talk. As I mentioned, the historic summit in June 2020 was quite significant because this was first of its kind, and in that meeting there were 9 broad MOUs signed and agreed upon between the two countries in defense, science and technology, cyber, public administration and governance, water resources, and so on and so forth. But it was important because that virtual summit had happened in the middle of the pandemic. There were lockdowns all around the world, in Australia and India. And that summit actually symbolized that Australia and India were quite keen to build something so that they can deal with the aftershocks and the impact of COVID that is unleashing its damage around the world in global economy. But bilaterally, trade has grown from 2007, when it was $13.6 billion, to $30 billion plus in 2018, but it's still way below the potential. We are the 8th largest partner, but we need to bring it much higher than that. And Peter Verghese in his report has said that India needs to be brought into the top 3 export markets of Australia. And in that context, I think his report in 2018 and the report by Ambassador Neil Wadhwa, who has joined us from India, are quite timely. And I say that these 2 reports are the Magna Carta of bilateral relationship and business and trade ties, and they give us a fantastic framework upon which both sides can progress in building their business and trade ties. Next slide, please. So in that context, when the churning in the Indo-Pacific, as I put it, happened, I thought it was quite significant what was happening in the Indo-Pacific. And Indo-Pacific per se, it represents the interconnectedness and the interdependence between two oceans, the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, where the 21st century, the great game in the 21st century will be unfolding. And we are seeing already being unfolded in the last 2 decades. So Indo-Pacific has emerged as the fulcrum and the hub of global politics and economics. And it's also that region is also the lifeline of global trade, because through Malacca Straits, 70% of the trade and oil supplies, pass every year. And what had happened was in last year, 2020, we had seen where, since the outbreak of COVID-19, the pandemic has had a debilitating impact, crippling impact on world economies. And what infuriated the world community, including Australia and India, was the lack of transparency. And in that context, with the change of presidency in the United States, Joe Biden coming to power, he started giving more push to look at the geopolitical structure and architecture of Indo-Pacific, and that's why he convened this virtual summit. So I think it is important to connect what has been happening at the bilateral level and what has been happening at the geopolitical level. So on one hand, you had the Australia-China tensions with regards to what happened in the 5G Huawei controversy, Australia criticism of persecution of Uyghur minority, the Hong Kong protests, and the Taiwan issue, and then of course Australia's demand for investigating the origin of the pandemic. So that infuriated China, and as a result, we have had trade war and very hot polemics going on between the two sides. On the other hand, in South Asia, we have had skirmishes at the border between India and China, first in Doklam and then in the Ladakh sectors, which was leading to bilateral tensions. So these new realities on the Indian front and the Australian front spurred both sides and they came to realization that it is about time they came together to deal with the challenge, which was not only bilateral, it was quite regional and global in its outreach. And hence we've seen the four powers coming together as a part of that quadrilateral understanding. Next slide, please. So Quad had transpired as a concept in 2007. It was involving US, Japan, Australia, and India. But it was basically originally bogged down by the differences between Australia and India relationship over a number of issues. Uranium was there. Then we had the racism issue. So those bilateral differences were impeding the growth of Quad at the time. So basically, Indo-Pacific was more or less hinging on US pivot strategy. But over the years, what has happened is the upswing in relationship between US and India, India and Japan, and Australia and India in business and trade and defense. We had seen these four powers coming together on a bilateral level, and that kind of an understanding and deepening of ties encouraged them to come together at a more collective level, at the level of Quad. And it was in this context Joe Biden had hosted that inaugural Quad virtual summit on the 12th of March. And if I had looked into the agenda of the Quad, and I had realized that it was quite deliberate how they had kept the agenda of the Quad quite broad. And they said the agenda of the Quad virtual summit was COVID-19 strategy, vaccine production, climate change, supply chain resilience, critical and emerging technologies, free, open, and secure and prosperous Indo-Pacific. So, and it was quite deliberately kept like that to because they didn't want unnecessary sensitivities being raked up in Beijing. But if you look at the joint, I think one of the most powerful of writings in recent years, if you look at the op-ed written by the four leaders, there were some very subtle references made, and which were indicating what the message that this quadrilateral understanding was giving in the region. First, the reference to group of democracies, which meant that the authoritarianism which was in the region could only be tackled through democracies. Then the reference to free and open, secure Indo-Pacific was another attempt to show that we need a free and open and stable Indo-Pacific where territorial sovereignty is respected. You have a rule of law. Everything is done in a transparent manner. So this was the concept. This was the idea behind using that term. And the joint pandemic efforts, which have been emphasized in the agenda, was meant to win the hearts and minds of regional countries. Many countries are there who are deeply concerned at how China has been pushing its policies in the region, but they cannot speak. So this joint pandemic efforts is also in a way to win the hearts and minds of these countries in the Indo-Pacific region. Next slide, please. So how I see this is I see it as a double delight because first of all, if you look at Australia and India, they have common interests bilaterally and regionally now. They have deeply shared values of democracy, rule of law, and then both have now got a very challenging relationship with China. So this is the common bond which is bringing them together. Peter Verghese in his report had actually mentioned this categorically in 2018, that the bilateral ties and the broader relation between Australia and India cannot be seen in isolation. And this is where we see the quadrilateral, the Quad's emergence, which makes Australia and India a geopolitical partner. And the comprehensive strategic partnership makes us a bilateral partner wherein we'll address bilateral issues, including business and trade. So in the broader relationship, you will see that both Australia and India have common approaches to the region. So India's Forum for Indo-Pacific Island Cooperation Act, which is part of the Act policies, is quite in sync with Australia's own Pacific step up in the region. And recently, I was talking to one of the DFAT representative, Derek O'Brien, who used to participate in our events. He has been posted in PNG, and he was saying that, Ashutosh, I'm looking forward to talking to my Indian counterpart, because the kind of work India is doing in PNG in the current pandemic outbreak is exemplary, and we are very thankful for that. So it shows that how Australia and India are looking at the entire region. Australia, on its part, had over the years backed India's bid for the UNSC seat on counterterrorism, of course, uranium supplies. Then Australia has been quite supportive of India's International Solar Alliance initiative, and also India's entry into Australia Group Westerner Arrangement and NSG. And last year, we have, during the virtual summit, we had seen the MLSA, which was signed, which is the Mutual Logistics Support Agreement, allowing both sides to use islands, Coco Islands and Keeling Islands, and Andaman and Nicobar, which is with India. And India also agreed to include Australia after a long time into the Malabar naval exercises. So this shows that both sides were beginning now to see the benefits of overturning their previous inhibitions. And as a result, we had seen both sides shunning the hesitations of history which were there in terms of the sensitivities that they had towards China. But what transpired in the last 12 months has been critical in pushing them towards these kinds of arrangements. At the bilateral level, as I said, you have the business and trade interest. And of course, now in Australia, we will see the increasing role of the Indian diaspora and business organizations. 1 in 50 Australians was born in India. And so I think now, as at the geopolitical level, at the bilateral level, as relationship grows, the role of Indian diaspora and business organization like the Australia-India Business Council is extremely critical. And we at the bilateral level, we both have common values, Australia and India, and we have a common approach in terms of how we see the world to be unfolding. Next slide, please. So in the end, how I see the opportunity for Australia-India is if you see the two reports. First report by Ambassador Anil, Mr. Peter Verghese was brought in 2018. That was in the pre-COVID phase. And in the post-COVID era, we had the Australia strategy by Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, which in a way is good because it ensures that continuum in assessments of the ground reality. If both were before pre-COVID, we would have had to do a lot of realignment. But I think the Ambassador Anil Wadhwa report has come at a very opportune time. And in that context, as I mentioned, what has been transpiring at the bilateral level, at the geopolitical level, I see Australia and India, both bilaterally and geopolitically, playing a very important role in the next decade or so. And they are well positioned to play their respective leadership roles in the region. Both remain very keen to expand their business and trade relationship in the region, in the context of what is happening in the region. And we all know, we have talked about it again and again, that there are immense opportunities in education, agriculture, energy, resources. I've listed them all there. I won't take much of your time in there. But I must say this, that as I see Australia and India coming together, this is only going to make task easy for the negotiators on both sides, which is going to help in ironing out the differences we have had in the last 9 rounds. I think 11 rounds of talks we have had on SICA. So I think this is only going to help those negotiations. What is important here to remember, as Peter Verghese wrote in his report, that governments neither have the capacity nor the inclination to direct business out, let alone expending resources. So here, I think the role of the diaspora, role of business organization, role of people who are looking at India experts, institutions who have that India literacy, it becomes extremely important. So this is where IAI has joined hands with Australia India Business Council, with DFAT, with the Queensland government in pushing bilateral relationship in various areas, in defense, business, trade, sports. So I think this is a very historic opportunity for both sides. And Australia and India are at the cusp of something really, really, I think, significant in our bilateral history. And I think we should not allow this opportunity to go amiss. Next slide, please. Thank you all very, very much. And I would encourage you to kindly visit us at our website for the Institute, and also for our India News Fortnightly, which is a fortnightly, very serious newspaper which we bring out, which has got editorials, which has got special coverage, which has got Make in India features. We have got World This Week feature in it. We bring in cover stories, story from India, Australia, from states. It's a very serious newspaper. So I would strongly urge you to visit us on that, subscribe to us, so that we can bring the latest policy dialogues, engagements, events, and publications for you. Thank you very, very much. And sorry for if I shot my time.
No, not at all. Thank you very much. And I think we've got plenty of time for Q&A. I think there have been a couple of questions that have come in already that we could start with. I know Muthuraj put in a question regarding, and perhaps I should just ask him to talk to it rather than try and read out what he sent. Yeah. So Muthuraj, do you want to go ahead?
That's all right. You can ask the question.
No, you go ahead.
No, it's basically, I think, thanks for the talk, Dr. Mishra. I know you did talk in your couple of slides, talked about the economic benefits that we should get. And you also mentioned about the SICA, and you said it will accelerate. Can you talk a little bit about how it will accelerate the Quad thing? Because it was a defense start, and then it's moved towards an economic gathering, because it's not formally done through the NATO constitution. So just talk through us about how it will help. Thanks.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. See, this is something which is unfolding bit by bit. As far as Quad is concerned, we should look at the positive aspect, and that is that after so much of derailment that we had seen in the fruition of Quad over the years, finally we have seen the 4 countries coming together and agreeing to come on a common platform. So from that point of view, the emergence of Quad is important in addressing not only the directly defense related issue, but also the larger interest of the region. And if you look at the agenda of the Quad itself, there are a couple of mentions, Raj, which they had made. One was of supply chain disruptions. And then they were also making a reference to critical and emerging technologies. So these were clear references that Quad 1 has a very sort of strong economic component and trade, business and trade component to it. But of course, business and trade cannot take place when the region is unstable, when there are security instabilities in the region. So for that, a message also had to be given by the 4 Quad members that under the rubric of democratic setup, under the global common goods, under the framework of free, open, and secure Indo-Pacific, what the 4 countries are pushing for is a region where territorial sovereignty is respected. We do not alter boundaries with our free will, and as a result, Indo-Pacific, which is very stable and secure. So if you have those kinds of stability, then obviously it is going to help with business and trade. As I mentioned, Malacca part of the Indo-Pacific and through which world 70% trade flows. So from that point of view, I don't see Quad becoming very sometime soon like a NATO, because it's I think its basic objective is more it's not military oriented. It is basically business and trade oriented in terms of stabilizing the region for greater cohesion in the business and trade fields. And for that, there's a little bit of the defense and security dimension where they want to keep this region stabilized. But coming on to SICA, as I mentioned, since 2000 up to 2011, there have been 9 rounds. And after, I think 2015 was the last round of talks. But after that, nothing has happened. And but from the Indian point of view, I think India's stand has been similar with regards to SICA and with regards to RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, because India was quite concerned with whether these arrangements will hurt its domestic market or the farmers. And on the Australian side, the high tariffs and market access, rules of origin were some of the issues which are of concern to Australia. But my point is that as in the last 12 months, what we have seen is that Australia and India have shown the willingness and the keenness to come together for the larger regional good and the public good, I must say. And this is where I see the hope for both sides trying to negotiate in a give and take manner on SICA, because there are issues which will have to be discussed, sector by sector, on market by market, and what will be the tariff rate, and etc. But my point is that they're coming together on Quad, the understanding that they have shown and how our bilateral relationship has grown in the last, I think, couple of years. It showed that both sides have the capacity to sort of make compromises even on SICA.
Can I take the liberty to ask Mrs. Archana Singh, would it be possible for you to not necessarily make a comment on Quad, but on SICA and how you think that's progressing in light of the discussions that are taking place?
Well, thank you to all the presenters, firstly, for this very descriptive and very, very knowledgeable presentation. And I think it's been really helpful to have that sort of overview and sort of well-rounded discussion along the Quad. And as we've just been hearing, like the bilateral ties and the regional commonalities between India and Australia are converging more and more. So I feel that this is just going to be helpful in the future for any kind of bilateral relationship that we are going to be having. And I think as the geopolitical realities set in, and everyone else seems to understand the way the world is going post-COVID, I think India and Australia will be on a very solid ground going into the future.
Thank you.
Can I just add a word of caution there, Nick? And that is that as the vaccination program rolls out, there may well be a atavistic look back at relationships that have previously governed Australia, including a better relationship with China. Now, it's very important in this time that we, as a business council, strongly encourage the trade and investment between our two countries. And I just take a slightly different perspective from Ashutosh on defense. And that is, I think there is room for much, much closer defense ties, both in supply and in joint defense initiatives. And what I think is of significant observation is that in the South China Sea, India's support and collaboration in maritime security was actually a surprising degree of formal buy-in in moving very decisively in supporting the position on South China Sea and not taking a view that's oblique in language. And I think that's very significant in terms of the defense ties. And otherwise, I think, Ashutosh has presented an excellent detail of the Quad relationship, but I just add that caution, and we need to get our relationships now with the Business Council of Australia and Export Council of Australia to start that engagement at a much higher level than has characterized the bilateral trade and investment to date.
Thank you. I mean, I think that covers to some degree Philip D'Souza's question that he sent in earlier, which was which areas in defense are potentially sought to benefit the Quad formation, and specifically involving B2B marketplace between the two countries. And I think, not only defense, but any of the four areas have initiatives that.
And I think just quickly, Nick, and I think because Australia and India already have had discussion in drone research and development and also in shipbuilding. So as Indo-Pacific conglomeration grows, you will see these kinds of agreements and discussions coming to the fore.
Can I just jump in for another question to Jim based on the defense, Nick?
Yep, sure.
It's basically to do about I mean, not many of us can talk about these things, but generally the neodymium and the Europeans, which are the rare earth metals, with the defense industry very much in need of these things. And while we are having these issues with the, when you talked about South China Sea, we're talking about the Senkaku Islands, which Japanese claim, and then you got the Diaoyu, which the Chinese claim, which is the same place. So I'm just trying to see how Australia, India, while India has got larger deposits of these rare earth metals, they're looking for Australia. So how do you think, as an AIBC, we'll work this through to ensure that our dependency on the country which is currently produces, while the bilateral relations between Australia and India grows? And we all know what happened when Japan arrested the fishing guy who came into China a few years ago. So with all that background, I just want to see how the Business Council work through with how we manage it. Thanks, Jim.
Well, I think we have an industry chair's position on resources and also renewable energy. But let's take resources. We already have with the Adani Group, for example, and I know this is not a fashionable thing to say on this kind of a session, but the reality is India does need coal, and Adani has done, in my view, quite a good job in ensuring that supply for the next 25 years. Now, that's one resource. The other one that is very important pursuant to the Modi-Morrison summit is rare earth minerals and lithium and other key minerals that are needed on the defense front and on the high-tech front. And I think there are really great opportunities here for our mining companies in Queensland and WA to really look at that, work with Australian companies and Indian companies, look at that supply chain in mining and including mets. And I think there are good opportunities there that we should pursue. and we should be working with our Indian companies that are currently in Australia to see if we can further that. And in addition to that, I would like to see some of the large Indian companies start to become part of the defense industry suppliers, joining the ranks of, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, other major suppliers. It'd be good to see them coming in. That in turn will connect to the supply chain on the resources front. So I think it's really a really great opportunity to study very closely what is the supply chain in the defense industry, particularly in rare minerals, but also in other aspects of defense. And now that we've got this quad operating, we have an unrivaled opportunity to work with India to create a win-win, because at the moment, that is an area, whether we like it or not, that China has a huge strategic advantage.
If I may add here quickly, Jim, the joint statement following the virtual summit, which was issued, the point 8 in section 2 says that Australia conveyed that India could consider it as a stable, reliable, and trusted supplier of high-quality mineral resources to India. Both sides jointly decided to diversify and expand the existing resources partnership, and the MOU on cooperation in the field of mining and processing of critical and strategic material identify specific areas where both sides can work together. So I think this explicitly says that Australia is very keen to become a stable supplier for India, and I think that's a huge.
And we are good partners to help implement that MOU.
Absolutely.
Amit, is Amit on?
Yes, Nick. Having been involved with business development with India from the UK, and I'm being new here in Australia, so forgive me for sounding a little bit ignorant if I'm not. It takes a long time to get anything done with India. It's a difficult place to negotiate, and we've got to recognize that Australian business wants quick solutions. So I think there are certain other sectors, rather than being stuck on old world sectors, let's focus on ones where Australia was actually present. For instance, in banking, ANZ bought Grindlays and then they exited, and now they're desperately trying to get back in. India has a situation where 70% of its banks are public sector, and it's desperate to grow the private sector banks. So having that regulator to regulator discussion to help Australian banks smooth their way into India, for instance, could be really, this is the two biggest sectors in Australia are financial services and mining. And I would say if we can help that sector, that would be a really big way to facilitate more trade finance, more business intelligence for Australian businesses, because they will have more, they'll have a bank that's there which actually can provide them that intelligence, that can provide them that base to grow. So I also, with regard to coal, and it's a sensitive topic, and the Adani Group has made a very, very big investment here. But the reality is that climate change is our biggest threat in the next 10 years. There's been plenty of UN reports that actually say that. And Australia is doing some wonderful things things like hydrogen. If we can collaborate on those sort of areas too, personally, I think rather than trying to where they are, the one thing I learned of doing business in India is India does business when the politicians sleep at night. Okay. If you get stuck with the bureaucratic system in India, we are not going to make progress. And if we have to
just let Jim sort of follow that up.
I think new sectors would be the focus area.
Can I just say first, I totally agree with you that climate change is a very important part of our agenda, but also how we actually gravitate to that is very important. We should do so in a very smart and intelligent way, not an ideological way. And what I'm saying is that in the case of Adani, for example, it is one of the biggest leaders in renewable energy. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, so you can see for yourself. I'm not in any way I'm very much in favor of the climate change agenda. And in fact, the Quad has climate change as one of its working committees. And I think we need to look at the whole picture, the paradoxes as well, as we work through solutions. But I think in terms of what's not being given enough credit for is that Prime Minister Modi has certainly modernized the Indian economy. I don't think there can be any doubt about that if you look at it from 2013 to the current time. There has been a significant amount of deregulation. There is at least a greater awareness of the need for business to businesses to get together. I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking it is so bureaucratic, so difficult to do business, and therefore I'm not going to bother about it, right? No, I'm with you. I'm saying that we work with Australia and others. We encourage greater deregulation where it's needed, be it tariffs in agriculture, for example, and moving into a range of other areas. So I guess I'm an optimist. India is also a democracy, and I think that's very, very important. But you're quite right in terms of understanding the difficulty of doing business, understanding the importance of getting an Indian partner, for example, in accelerating business. I've had people, for example, do trade with China that at first thought, this is great, I'm going to do it. I know a personal person here from Brisbane who lost millions of dollars doing a deal, which was subsequently reneged on because he did it with the wrong side of the Communist Party that went out of favor. Now, that sort of stuff doesn't happen in India because you've got a judicial system that's not dissimilar from ours, albeit a bit slower than ours. But otherwise, we're on the same page. Let's look at the negative and see how we can work that into a positive outcome.
No, actually, what I was trying to say is we've got to look at new opportunities.
Yeah,
Sure.
Not the old ones.
Agree.
Because the new ones have got less regulations. And where we have less regulations, we can help. So for instance, to give you a good one is the Smart Cities Initiative.
Yeah.
Now Australia
Amit,
has
I'm going to be, Amit, sorry to interrupt. I'm going to be a bit rude as we're running out of time. Apologies for this. Because talking on Quad, I just want us to wrap it up because there are other people who want to, we can have.
Thanks for that. Sorry, Amit, I
If
think Mark
Nick,
had a question. And
if I've got 30 seconds for responding just quickly.
Can we just have Mark ask the question and then Ashutosh, combine the two together?
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. So in terms of the discussion around financial regulation or financial cooperation, is there any discussion around financial cooperation, just like Australia and New Zealand has, in terms of being able to have easier movement of capital flows and investment? Because I think I work in the investment capital markets, and it seems to be a barrier to doing work or investment with India.
Ashutosh, he's gone off. Oh yeah, there he is. Ashutosh.
Yeah. With regards to the previous point, Amit, I do agree with you with regards to doing business in India. It has been very challenging, but having said that, we must also acknowledge that things have changed quite dramatically over the last several years. And we have seen, and it's not the Indian government report saying that, there have been global studies which have been saying that that's why India has been going up in the rankings of ease of doing business. Now, India also publishes state-wise ranking of ease of doing business, which shows that several states are pulling up their socks in terms of ironing out that labyrinth of bureaucracy and the laborious processes. They've been working on that the central government have been pushing these states in terms of easing much of the bureaucratic steps which were there in setting up businesses. So things have improved in the last several years. But at the same time, it is also important for institutions like AIBC, for us as an institution, that we, in fact, also advise the Australian businesses on 2 points. One, trying to promote India literacy in terms of these changes which are coming about in India, about what has now changed, and also also telling them that they need to be a little bit thick-skinned in terms of when they are going over there and doing business in India. That would only help while India tries to put its own house in order. And lastly, I think there's one big point people miss out, is that when India is acquiring coal from around the world, India is also catering to over 40% of the people around the country who haven't seen electricity in 70 years. And these people have to be given. And you go to the villages and talk about climate change, for them it is a luxury. So I think India has to also cater to them. But at the same time, we should also remember India is ranked 3rd in the world when it comes to RE. So it's also trying to balance the two sectors.
So
It may be just, Nick, it may be worthwhile just adding that that pursuant to the Morrison Summit, there is actually a specific area on financials and looking at reducing and making business a lot easier. We also have an industry chair that focuses on finance as well. And I would recommend that Mark touch base with us and we could work together on it.
Yeah, so I think, is that okay with you, Mark, if we leave it at that?
Yes.
Okay, well, we're sort of running out of time, so I would like to.
I was putting up his hand.
Sorry, Mr. D'Souza, yes?
Yeah, I just want to make one comment. I mean, we talk about climate change. One of the things we haven't discussed about nuclear energy, I mean, John Howard started the debate in 2006, and Fukushima happened. But the difference between Fukushima and Australia, we got a very safe landmass, and there's an opportunity there. PM Morrison has said he'll only follow that through if there's bipartisan support for it. Now, the ALP conference, I think that's one of the debating points over the next couple of days. And if we get support from that, I think it'll make a significant difference going forward. It might take 30, 40 years to get there, but I think it's one of the things with climate change that might assist.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I'm going to ask Muthraj to come in with a vote of thanks. So before so we can wrap up on time. So Muthraj.
Thank you. It's a good discussion, everyone, like participating. And I know Ashutosh at the beginning made a comment saying, people came up very quickly with, getting this organized. So I just want to thank the people behind the scenes. Vishal, who was on the technical side. And of course, we have both Wendy and Kritika on the other side, looking at, making sure all these things happen at the background. So thank you guys for making sure this happens. And can't be without saying thanks to both Jim and Ashutosh. Yeah, a lot of things covered, a lot of areas discussed. So thank you, gentlemen, for your insights and your thoughts. And not but the least, all the participants who came in. Thank you all for coming in to listen to this. And what I also want to remind at this stage is there's one that's happening a couple of days on the 1st of April, which is on Thursday, where we are having, the speakers coming up into, okay, I think they're changing the slide. I'll wait for them to come to that slide. It's now the other one, because we've got the in-depth analysis of the India budget. So that's happening day after tomorrow. And if you have not registered, please register for that event. And you'll have some insights on what the budget means to us who want to go to India and do some business. So have a listen to that. And then later on, a few days later, we have the Western Australia talking about the election and relationships between India. So it's going to be an interesting discussion. There's a few people who are coming in to talk about it. So I encourage everyone to register and listen to these two discussions. And once again, thank you all. And as we talked earlier, we'll try to finish everything on time. And I think we've just turned 6:30. So I thank everyone to be able to do things on time. And who I didn't thank finally was High Council, Honorary Council Archana Singh for coming in and giving her thoughts also. Thank you once again. Thanks everyone for participating. Have a good night. Namaste.
Thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks a lot, and thanks for pivoting onto this one. Thanks.
And join us in the cricket match if you can.
Yes.
And thanks, Nick, for hosting it.
Yeah, also, thank you.
I didn't thank Nick at all. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Yeah.